Okay. Cognition and biology in learning. We are almost done here. So behaviorism, introduced by B.F. Skinner, explains classical and operant conditioning, but it does not explain more complex forms of learning. So there are other forms beside the basic non-associative and associative learning that we just talked about. There are other forms of learning. We don't always learn by pairing stimuli, and we don't always learn by getting rewards when we do something good and by getting punishments when we do something bad. That's just not how the world works all the time. And behaviorism, B.F. Skinner's theory, as the 20th century went on, behaviorism was not able to explain some of the things that a lot of the newer cognitive psychologists were looking at. So that's why cognitive psychology really took over. And there's sort of an increased emphasis on looking at the mind and the brain, including behavior. So insight learning, for example, is something that would not have been able to be explained by behaviorism. So that occurs when previously learned behaviors are suddenly combined in unique and useful ways. So a child may learn to use a grabbing tool for fun, but finds that she can stand on her toes and reach up with the tool to grab things she normally could not. So she probably did not see someone doing this. She probably was not rewarded when she did this. But it came to her in an insight, and she realized that she could use other behaviors to accomplish something. And latent learning is another type where behaviors learn, but it's not necessarily expressed until it's needed. So a child may passively learn the way to his school, but is not going to express the knowledge until he finally walks there alone. So that's a sort of passive learning that we're all doing every day, but that children do at an alarming rate. Some biological factors. So learning, obviously, you could probably intuit that it's constrained by biological factors. So blatant example, a chimpanzee could never learn to speak because of neural and anatomical reasons, just neural and anatomical differences than humans. So reinforcers with biological relevance, like food or sex, like we talked before, they tend to enforce learned behaviors more quickly. So those primary reinforcers are a lot better at rewarding and reinforcing behavior than secondary reinforcers would be. The process of learning involves physical changes to your nervous system. During long-term potentiation, the synaptic strength between two neurons that fire are strengthened, creating a new neural pathway that is thought to transfer information into long-term memory. So the way that our neurons fire and the way that they're wired actually change when we encode things in long-term memory. So that's really all long-term potentiation is. That's really all you have to know about it for the MCAT. So we should also keep in mind that behaviors may also be biologically innate. So these instinctive behaviors are not taught, and they're usually shared among those of the same species. So, all baby humans are going to have very similar instinctive behaviors, just like all puppies are going to have the same instinctive behaviors. A little bit about mirror neurons. Humans have mirror neurons, which are specific sets of neurons that fire when an action is performed and when that action is only observed. So it's the same neuron. It's firing when the action is performed and when it's observed. Mirror neurons are still not completely understood, but there are some hypotheses that explain their importance. So, for example, one hypothesis says that mirror neurons help connect the sight and action of a movement. So that is more of like a biological paradigm. We're talking about the coordination of movement with sight. And the other one that's, I would say, more relevant for psychology and sociology is that it's been hypothesized that mirror neurons in the mirror neuron system are responsible for empathy and other sort of vicarious emotions in primates. So some people believe that because we have this mirror neuron system, that is why we are able to experience the emotions that other people are experiencing. It's all hypotheses, and none of it has been proven yet. But this is about as in depth that the MCAT will go on mirror neurons, unless it's presented to you in a passage. Okay, observational learning. So humans can also learn through observational learning, and most basically, we learn observationally by modeling. So modeling is imitating behaviors that we have previously observed. Albert Bandura had a series of experiments, and he demonstrated how predisposed humans are to observational learning and how much it actually affects our behavior. So in his studies, he showed young children videos of adults acting either aggressively or ignoring the Bobo doll. So the Bobo doll is that sort of large doll that when you punch it, it falls over. It has a strong center of gravity. So when you punch it, it pops right back up. So he wanted to see how children would change their behavior when they saw adults acting differently with these dolls. So he showed these young children the videos of adults, and even when the children did not see the consequences of the actions, they tended to mimic the actions that they saw on the video and presented with the Bobo doll in person. So but they may not have even known why they were doing it. They may not have even known the consequences of their actions. But if they saw a video of an adult acting aggressively toward the Bobo doll, when they were presented with it, they were more likely to also act aggressively. So these studies, from these studies, Bandura formed his social cognitive theory, which holds that humans can learn behaviors and consequences from observing others in a social context, kind of exactly like they did this. If it's a new social situation, we are going to learn behaviors based on other observations. And another review question. So which of the following statements is false? Take a minute, read those over, and we will go over it. So which of the following statements is false? The correct answer is B. Latent learning is a type of operant conditioning in which no punishment is used. So let's go over the correct answers. Correct answer. So insight learning occurs when two previously learned behaviors, that should say, are suddenly combined to execute a more complex behavior, which is true. We just talked about that. We had the diagram of the pigeon before. We reward it when it steps up. We reward it when it walks toward the button. We reward it when it presses the button. And that all is combined and it teaches a more complex behavior. C, Albert Bandura's Bobo experiments gave much insight to the role observational learning plays in child behavior. It definitely did. As we were just talking about, it was super important. And it really allowed us to understand just exactly how child behavior, sort of how it works in terms of modeling and in terms of observation. And D, also, animals do not have to learn instinctive behavior. It is biologically programmed from birth, which is true. It's inherent. That's really the definition of instinctive behavior. So the only one that's really false is latent learning is a type of operant conditioning in which no punishment is used, which is not true. Latent learning is not operant conditioning. That's really that. Latent learning is more passive. We're not using operant conditioning. We are not rewarding or punishing actions. So B is false, which would make it the correct answer for this question.